Rammus Steelbane is a venerable veteran amongst the ranks of the Iron Warriors, having joined during the later years of the Great Crusade. When the Legion fell to the temptations of chaos during the Horus Heresy, Rammus saw no compunction and gladly slaughtered those less willing during the Dropside massacres of Istvan V. Nor did he have any objections when it came to slaughtering fellow Astartes from other legions as he joined the Iron Warriors throughout their campaigns during the Heresy. Following the defeat of the traitor legions at the Siege of Terra, Rammus, like the rest of the Fourth Legion, fled into the Eye of Terror. For an unknown period of time, Steelbane dwelled within that hellish realm of space, forced to scrape by fighting other desperate bands of renegades and other far worse things in order to merely survive. Although this constant cycle of combat enabled him the means to survive, Rammus could not help but feel his talents were being wasted, as he could not willingly leave the Eye for fear of running into loyalists. Whether by coincidence or some other darker power, Rammus's chance arrived in the form of a space hulk that had managed to warp itself into the Eye. Immediately sending his men to scout the vessel, Steelbane could not hide the glint in his eye at the thought of finally being able to strike back at the hated Imperium that cast him out. As is the case of many such hulks, the ship contained many dangers that it had picked up over its many centuries drifting through the void. Bands of orc looters roamed the halls, whilst in other places the infernal presence of the warp had made itself known, filling entire corridors with the whispers and cackles of demons, as the shadow stretched out to swallow any foolish enough to tread down their path. Not wishing to let this opportunity to escape the Eye slip through his fingers, Rammus hurled his Chaos Space Marines into the depths of the hulk. For weeks, the sounds of bolter fire accompanied screams of anguish as blood was spilled throughout the hulk. Yet, as mighty as the denizens lurking within the hulk were, they paled in comparison to the sheer ferocity of the Iron Warriors in their desperate bid to finally escape the hellish region of space. Although it would be all but impossible to truly rid the hulk of the voices, it was nevertheless brought under the control of the Iron Warriors and rebranded the Void Fang. No sooner after the ship had been taken did it warp back into the material universe of its own volition. This came as quite the shock to Rammus, as he and his men were flung to the other end of the galaxy with no way to stop it or even to know where they were headed. The voices within the walls cackled loudly as the Voidfang exited the warp above a verdant Imperial world. A thin smile spread itself over Rammus's lips as he ordered his men to burn the world to ash. The defense of the world, if such a word could be used to describe the pitiful efforts of the PDF, was a short and brutal affair. Caught unprepared, the planetary defense forces were swept aside as hundreds of bloodthirsty heretic Astartes descended upon the world like rabid wolves, burning and pillaging all in their path. Within days, the last hive had fallen to the Iron Warriors. By the time the Imperial Navy arrived to the world, the planet had been scorched to a cinder, and any sign of the perpetrators had vanished as though swallowed by the void. So this continued for decades at a time, as the Voidfang would warp randomly from system to system, delivering its deadly cargo. Imperial high worlds, Orc strongholds, Eldar outposts, or even the fortress worlds of the traitor Marines, it did not matter. One by one they burned before the Iron Warriors would stow back aboard the Voidfang with their loot, leaving only dark monuments and ash as signs of their passing. And with every victory, Steelbane's hubris grew. He would take to boasting before his assembled lieutenants of his combat prowess and flawless tactics, claims that many knew he had the skill to back up. It was upon the Imperial world of Gorus 9 that Steelbane would make a fatal folly in the year 975 M41. Although the planet's defenders had put up a valiant defense effort, Rammus had been more than capable of crushing the majority of resistance, forcing the Loyalists to fall back to their final bastion in the form of the hive city Erodus. Yet, just before the Iron Warriors could begin their siegecraft, the skies darkened. With the force of 1,000 artillery shells, chitinous spores began to land amongst the heretics, disgorging swarms of vicious creatures of unending hunger. Falling back to their own fortifications, the Iron Warriors fought back against the newly emerged foe. Boltrons tore the smaller creatures apart by the dozen, but for every one felled, 3 more would take its place. Only now did Rammus understand that the Voidfang had emerged in the path of a newly emerged Tyranid hive fleet, later to be designated by Magus biologists as Vendigo. Unable to retreat back into the relative safety of the Space Hulk and warp out of the doomed sector, the Iron Warriors dug in and prepared to sell their lives dearly. However, Rammus was not prepared to fall just yet. In his desperation, he called out to the Dark Gods to aid him, promising he would erect a monument to their glory, unlike anything the universe had seen, if only they would aid him in his time of need. Gathering up the captives they had taken from the rest of Gorus 9, the Iron Warriors began a great ritual. For 6 days, the Tyranids launched wave after wave at the barricades, only to be driven off, each time the cost to do so greater than the last. Ironically, had the Iron Warriors succeeded in destroying Eridus, they would have most likely fallen, as the Tyranids were drawn to the hive in search of easier prey, allowing Steelbane time to cast his dark ritual. On the eve of the 7th day, Rammus sacrificed the final captive. The earth began to erupt with bouts of molten rock, and the few remaining plants withered and died. With an audible tear, the fabric of reality was ripped asunder, and legions of demonic beasts assailed the Tyranids. Emboldened by the emergence of sudden allies, or perhaps merely driven insane by the warp energies, now coalescing around Gorus, the Iron Warriors led a counterattack against the swarm. Heavy bolters reducing broods of beasts to a fine red mist, whilst ancient hellbrutes clashed with carnifexes. Amidst it all, Rammus Steelbane, clad in tactical dreadnought armor, dueled the monstrous hive tyrant. Smashing aside the beast's ribcage with one power fist gauntleted hand, the warsmith raised his combi melter to the still bleeding wound and pulled the trigger. The psychic shockwave shattered the swarm, as the hive tyrant's death throws released large portions of the Tyranids from the controlling influence of the hive mind. Reverting to more base instincts, the surviving Xenos were easy prey for the Iron Warriors. Staring down at the hive tyrant slain by his hand, Steelbane laughed. Truly, he was a god amongst men, for who else could fell such a mighty beast? Forgetting his earlier pact, the warsmith immediately declared to his men that a monument carved into the likeness of himself, bedecked in full battle plate, to be built, dedicated to his glory. Unfortunately, the Iron Warriors were not the only ones to hear Rammus's boasts this time. Incensed by the impertinent mortal who sought to cheat them of what they were owed, the Dark Gods snarled and cursed the warsmith from their lofty perches above. The sky turned to the color of rust. Rammus paused in his spiel, and he instead gave an animal-like scream of agony as the coils and wires within his suit of Terminator armor came alive and stabbed into his skin, and the ceramite plates becoming scalding hot, fusing together and sealing over in places. One warrior rushed forward to try and help his captain, only to have his skull crushed as the giant of the man flailed in agony. Pulling frantically at his helmet, Rammus found, to his horror, that it would not remove itself. He began to pull at other segments, only to find them likewise fused to his body. If he would not build a monument to the ruinous powers, then they would make him a living one. Given to despair, Rammus locked himself away for days on end, searching desperately through ancient texts, both of human and infernal origins, for a way to lift his curse. During one fever-pitched night of study, a herald appeared before him. though if he was really there, or merely a delusion dreamed up by the warsmith, none can say. The demon gibbered and babbled about how the gods demanded their due for saving his life, and that like an errant child, Steelbane had to be punished. But they were feeling ever so slightly merciful, and so had gifted Rammus a chance. If the warsmith could erect a monument to the gods so terrible and vast in their eyes to be worthy, they would remove the curse. For the past 24 years now, Steelbane has been plying the stars aboard Voidfang, seeking worthy foes to wage war on. On each world, the Iron Warriors erect dreadful monuments and temples in the images of Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle and Slaanesh, each more terrible than the last. Yet never is the offering deemed worthy enough, and so the warsmith remains locked away in his armor. Of all the inhabitants of the galaxy, there are two Rammus hates the most. He despises the Tyranids for what he perceives as being the cause of his pain, but yet he also despises the Eldari of Commorragh, as their debauchery and hedonism reminds him of the pleasures of the flesh denied to him, and the heads of many an Archon and Succubi decorate his trophy rack. Slowly, doubt begins to settle in Steelbane, as the walls of Voidfang whisper that the gods never intend to release him, regardless of how many walls he burns in their names, or temples he builds them. Yet, Steelbane continues his conquest, hoping against all odds that the voices are wrong.